Land of the Brave, A Bold History of the United States, read and published by Mr. Books. The United States stands as a testament to the unyielding will of a diverse people who have, time and again, defined history on their own terms, from the ingenuity of its indigenous peoples to the tireless struggles for freedom and equality, and from the audacious dreams of its founders to the ever-evolving challenges of modernity. The story of America is above all a bold and relentless quest for identity. It is a story of many contradictions, bravery and brutality, liberty and oppression, unity and division. It is in these contradictions that we find the essence of the American experience, a history both extraordinary and fraught, defined by its people's enduring resolve to forge a path toward progress. At its core, the United States is an idea, a daring proposition set forth in 1776, asserting that self-governance, equality, and liberty are not privileges reserved for the few, but rights to be claimed by the many. Yet, the founding vision of the nation emerged in an imperfect world marked by exploitation, oppression, and stark inequalities. For every step America has taken toward justice and inclusion, it has often stumbled through violence, exclusion, and strife. And yet, through each failure and triumph, the United States has continually strived to redefine itself, proving as resilient as its people. This book explores the American journey, not as a rigid timeline of events, but as a dynamic interplay of ideas, struggles, and moments of profound change. The title, Land of the Brave, reflects not only the courage of those who shaped the nation, but also the spirit of resilience that has propelled it forward, even during its darkest hours. From the indigenous societies, whose knowledge systems and cultures sustained the land for centuries, to the founding fathers who risked their lives for a new vision of governance, to the countless unsung heroes who fought for civil rights, equality, and freedom, bravery pulses through America's veins. In A Bold History of the United States, we will challenge simplistic narratives. Instead, we aim to offer a nuanced examination of what has made the United States extraordinary and ordinary, noble and flawed. Each chapter delves deeply into these complexities, examining the foundational moments, ideologies, and movements that have molded the United States into what it is today. At the heart of this work is an argumentative exploration of a simple yet profound question: how has the United States become a beacon of freedom and opportunity despite its pervasive struggles? This is not merely a story of historical triumphs, it is also a record of resilience in the face of adversity and a reminder that every generation of Americans has been tasked with the duty of reconciling the nation's ideals with its reality. By the end of this book, readers will have not only a deeper understanding of U.S. history, but also an appreciation for the complexity and bravery required to sustain, adapt, and uphold a nation born of revolution. Before we dive in, make sure to subscribe and hit that like button to support the channel. And don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss an audiobook that could change your life. Now, let's begin. Enjoy. Chapter 1. The Dawn of a Nation, Indigenous Societies, and Pre-Colonial America. Before American history begins with colonization, before the signing of the Declaration of Independence, there existed a rich tapestry of civilizations and cultures that spread across the land now known as the United States. The indigenous peoples of North America, with their diverse languages, traditions, and governance structures, laid the foundation for what would become the American story. Yet, this chapter of American history is often sidelined or misrepresented, reduced to footnotes in textbooks, overshadowed by tales of European conquest and colonization. Here, we seek to reclaim this history, placing indigenous societies at the forefront, where they rightly belong as the original stewards of the land. The indigenous peoples of North America were not monolithic. From the Iroquois Confederacy in the northeast to the Pueblo peoples of the southwest, from the nomadic Lakota Sioux in the Great Plains to the complex trading societies of the Mississippi Valley, such as the Cahokia, they developed diverse ways of life suited to their environments. Their societies were rich with traditions, governance systems, and technologies that were remarkable, given the natural world they inhabited. For instance, the Iroquois Confederacy created a sophisticated federal structure with shared governance that would inspire elements of the U.S. Constitution. Meanwhile, the Pueblo peoples built advanced irrigation systems to farm in arid climates, and the Mississippian culture erected vast ceremonial structures that rivaled those of ancient civilizations in scope and ambition. However, the arrival of Europeans in the late 15th and early 16th centuries disrupted these thriving societies. Diseases like smallpox, brought unintentionally or otherwise by settlers and explorers, decimated indigenous populations, reducing some groups by as much as 90%. While many Americans today view colonial expansion as an inevitability, it is necessary to recognize the profound loss and suffering it caused. The indigenous peoples did not passively fade into history. They resisted, adapted, and, in many cases, thrived against all odds. Crucially, understanding pre-colonial America means appreciating the philosophy that bound indigenous peoples to their land. For many of these societies, land was not something to be owned or exploited, but a sacred entity to be respected. The European colonizers, with their emphasis on private property and resource extraction, starkly contrasted with the communal ethos of indigenous cultures. This fundamental ideological clash would set the stage for centuries of conflict in American history, a conflict not only over land, but over the values that would define the nation. What the story of prehistoric and pre-colonial America ultimately reveals is that the United States did not emerge from a vacuum. The bravery and ingenuity of indigenous peoples shaped the land long before European settlers arrived. To ignore their stories is to deny the complexities of American history. It is in understanding these foundations that we can truly grasp the magnitude of the transformations that were to come. Chapter 2: Seeds of Change, Colonization and its Consequences. The arrival of European settlers in the Americas marked one of the most transformative periods in world history, reshaping the land, its people, and the eventual trajectory of global politics. For indigenous peoples, the colonization of North America was not a mere meeting of worlds, but an invasion that would upend centuries of culture, governance, and life. For the colonizers, it was the pursuit of wealth, opportunity, and religious freedom, albeit at the expense of those who had lived on the land for millennia. In examining this period, we confront the multifaceted consequences of colonization, an era both of creation and destruction, progress and exploitation. The initial colonial efforts were driven by a race for imperial power and resources among European nations. Spain, France, and later Britain viewed the Americas as an untapped wealth of natural resources and land. While the Spanish concentrated their efforts in Central and South America, the British colonies in North America offered a more complex case study. These colonies were not merely economic ventures. They also became laboratories for experiments in governance, labor systems, and religious toleration or lack thereof. Central to the colonial period was the appropriation of indigenous lands and labor. Treaties signed with indigenous nations were frequently broken or manipulated, ensuring European settlers could continually expand westward. This expansion came with a vicious cycle of mistrust and violence, as evidenced by events such as King Philip's War in the 1670s. Meanwhile, the labor systems developed by colonists introduced slavery into the foundation of economic life. initially through the enslavement of native peoples and later via the transatlantic slave trade. By the 1600s, enslaved Africans became crucial to economies that relied heavily on labor-intensive industries like tobacco and cotton. This chapter also examines the cultural and ideological seeds planted during this period. Liberty and self-governance themes that would become central to the revolution did not appear overnight. Many of the early colonists, escaping from religious persecution in Europe, yearned for the freedom to worship and govern as they saw fit. These ideals, however, were riddled with hypocrisy, as those who sought liberty for themselves often denied it to others. Finally, the chapter explores the environmental and demographic repercussions of colonization. The introduction of European crops, animals, and diseases created what is often termed the Columbian Exchange, radically altering ecosystems on both sides of the Atlantic. This exchange added wealth and agricultural innovation to the Old World, while simultaneously decimating indigenous populations in the New. By the end of this period, the seeds of the United States' future contradictions were firmly planted. Colonization was a story of resilience, bravery, and the human ambition to shape new worlds. However, it is likewise a history stained with exploitation, dispossession, and oppression, an inheritance the United States continues to reconcile. Chapter 3: Revolution and Rebirth, Breaking Free from the Old World. The American Revolution was not merely a war, but a seismic shift in political philosophy and human rights. Born from the crucible of colonial discontent and inspired by Enlightenment ideals, it represented a point of departure from a feudalistic world order dominated by monarchical absolutism. The colonists' revolt was as much against taxation as it was a rejection of their perceived subjugation under the British Parliament, a legislature in which they had no representation. However, the question remains: was the revolution truly a democratic movement, or was it primarily an attempt by colonial elites to consolidate power? The seeds of revolution were sown long before shots were fired at Lexington and Concord. Britain's attempts to exert control through measures like the Stamp Act of 1765 and the Townshend Acts of 1767 exacerbated tensions. These measures were not simply taxes, they struck at the heart of colonial identity. American colonists, used to a degree of self-governance, viewed such policies as egregious oversteps. In response, grassroots movements like the Sons of Liberty emerged, emphasizing the revolutionary zeal that had begun to creep into colonial life. The Declaration of Independence, however, was the grand philosophical statement of the Revolution. Drafted largely by Thomas Jefferson, the document articulated universal principles of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But it is necessary to critique its limitations. How universal could these principles be in a society that condoned slavery and excluded women and indigenous peoples from political participation? The ideals of the Declaration would remain aspirational for centuries, a fact underscored by persistent inequalities embedded in the new nation. Military success in the War for Independence was neither assured nor easily won. George Washington's Continental Army was underfunded, poorly supplied, and frequently demoralized. The turning point came not from sheer force, but from strategic alliances, such as France's intervention following the Battle of Saratoga in 1777. This demonstrated that the revolution was as much a geopolitical maneuver as it was an ideological battle. Upon victory, the nascent United States faced the arduous task of nation-building. What had been a loose alliance of rebellious colonies now required the establishment of a central authority. The transition from revolution to governance marked the birth of American federalism, a system fraught with compromises that would reverberate through history. While the revolution achieved independence, it also unleashed contradictions that continue to shape the nation's character: freedom for some but subjugation for others. Chapter 4: The Constitution and the Price of Liberty. The creation of the U.S. Constitution in 1787 marked a second revolution, one not fought on battlefields, but in the ideological arena of governance. It was here that the Founding Fathers wrestled with the challenge of creating a system that balanced liberty with order, democracy with authority, and unity with diversity. The Constitution was, above all, a document of compromise. One of the most profound compromises was over the question of slavery. The notorious 3/5 compromise, which allowed enslaved individuals to be partially counted for purposes of representation and taxation, exemplified the moral failures embedded in the document. Yet, slavery's acceptance was deemed necessary to unite disparate states. As historian David Bryan Davis noted, the Constitution was a bundle of compromises, reflecting the competing interests of agrarian and commercial states, large and small populations. Beyond its structural compromises, the Constitution innovated governance through its system of checks and balances. By dividing power between the executive, legislative, and judicial branches, the framers sought to avoid the tyrannies they associated with monarchical rule. However, this separation of powers has often produced gridlock rather than governance and ironic tension in a document meant to unify a fractured nation. The Bill of Rights, added in 1791, was a crucial addition. It codified liberties such as freedom of speech, religion, and press, while safeguarding against governmental overreach. Yet, these rights were initially conceived narrowly, applying almost exclusively to white male property owners. The notion of who qualified as we, the people, has been contested ever since. Debates over constitutional interpretation began almost immediately after it was ratified. Federalists, like Alexander Hamilton, viewed the Constitution as a dynamic document that allowed for strong centralized authority. Anti-federalists, like Thomas Jefferson, contended it should strictly limit federal power. This philosophical divide laid the groundwork for America's two-party system and continues to influence political discourse to this day. While the Constitution succeeded in establishing a functional government, it also institutionalized contradictions that would later explode in violent conflict, chiefly the tension between slavery and liberty. The document is both a triumph of political innovation and a reminder of the compromises that undermine the nation's loftiest ideals. Chapter 5: Expansion, Conflict, and the American Dream. The 19th century marked one of the most dynamic eras in American history, a period defined by territorial expansion, ideological conflict, and the enduring pursuit of the American dream. No phrase captured the ambitions of this time more succinctly than manifest destiny, the belief that the United States was divinely ordained to expand its territory across the North American continent. However, behind this lofty ideal lay a complex and often dark reality. Expansion came at the cost of relentless displacement and destruction for indigenous peoples, the perpetuation of chattel slavery, and the eruption of deep-seated conflicts, both at home and abroad. At the heart of territorial expansion was the Louisiana Purchase in 1803, an acquisition that effectively doubled the size of the young nation. Yet the westward push that followed was far from peaceful. The Trail of Tears stands as a grim reminder of the costs of expansion, a brutal forced migration of the Cherokee Nation and other Native American tribes under the Indian Removal Act of 1830. The insatiable hunger for land made it clear that progress, as defined by settlers, came at the expense of indigenous sovereignty and culture. Simultaneously, the westward expansion exacerbated tensions between free and slave states. As new territories were acquired, whether through war, treaties, or outright annexation, fierce debate arose over whether these territories would permit slavery. The Missouri Compromise of 1820 and the Compromise of 1850 were among the increasingly tenuous attempts to balance competing interests, but these measures could only delay the inevitable. The Mexican-American War, 1846–1848, added vast territories to the Union but reignited sectional disputes. The acquisition of Texas, California, and other lands promised economic opportunity while laying the foundations for bitter division. Though expansion was rife with conflict, it also embodied the driving optimism of the American dream. For settlers and immigrants alike, the acquisition of land symbolized self-sufficiency and boundless opportunity. The Homestead Act of 1862 epitomized this promise, offering land to individuals willing to cultivate it. Railroads crisscrossed the expanding map, connecting distant regions and propelling commerce, but they also left deep ecological scars and social repercussions, including the exploitation of immigrant labor, especially among Chinese railroad workers. In examining this complex chapter of the U.S. narrative, one cannot ignore the inherent contradictions of its aspirations. Expansion symbolized opportunity and progress for some while embodying subjugation and loss for others. Every frontier crossed brought with it both hope and destruction, leaving a legacy still felt in contemporary debates over land, identity, and historical memory. Chapter 6: The Civil War and the Fight for Unity and Equality. The Civil War remains one of the most defining and devastating periods in American history, a conflict that tested the limits of the nation's commitment to its founding ideals. Spanning from 1861 to 1865, the war was more than just a violent clash between the Union and the Confederacy. It was a moral reckoning over the fundamental issue of slavery and the unresolved tensions surrounding states' rights, regional differences, and federal authority. In this chapter, we will unpack the causes of the Civil War, the challenges posed by the conflict itself, and its far-reaching consequences for the United States, both in terms of legal equality and national identity. The roots of the Civil War lie in the unresolved contradictions of the Constitution, which allowed for the coexistence of freedom and slavery within a single nation. By the mid-19th century, the economic and social disparities between the North and South had become insurmountable. The Southern economy was heavily reliant on enslaved labor, particularly in the production of cotton, while the North was moving toward industrialization and wage labor. These differences were not merely economic but ideological, with the North embracing a narrative of progress and liberal democracy, while the South championed a way of life tied to agrarian values and white supremacy. The tipping point came with the election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860. Lincoln's commitment to halting the expansion of slavery into new territories was seen by Southern leaders as an existential threat to their way of life. In response, 11 Southern states seceded from the Union, forming the Confederate States of America. The Union, under Lincoln's leadership, refused to recognize the legitimacy of secession, arguing that preserving the United States as one indivisible nation was paramount. The war itself was a crucible of unprecedented violence and destruction. Battles such as Gettysburg, Antietam, and Fort Sumter resulted in staggering losses for both sides. More importantly, these battles underscored the stakes of the conflict, the survival of the Union, and the abolition of slavery. In 1863, Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, a turning point that transformed the Civil War from a struggle to preserve the Union into a fight for human liberation. However, victory for the Union in 1865 did not resolve the deep divisions within the country. While the 13th Amendment abolished slavery, the post-war period would reveal that legal freedom did not equate to social or economic equality for formerly enslaved people. The Reconstruction era, as discussed in Chapter 7, would bring new challenges as the nation struggled to rebuild and redefine itself. The Civil War's legacy endures in the American consciousness, not only as a cautionary tale about the dangers of division, but also as a testament to the resilience of those who fought for unity and equality. For the United States to live up to its ideals, it required sacrifice on an unimaginable scale. Ultimately, the war reinforced a painful but vital truth: no progress toward liberty and equality comes without struggle. Chapter 7: Civil Rights and Social Revolution, a nation challenged from within. The Civil Rights Movement occupies an essential chapter in the narrative of the United States, representing a profound clash between the country's founding ideals of equality and the entrenched systems of discrimination that had defined its social fabric for centuries. From the Reconstruction era to the mid-20th century, the path toward racial equality was systematically undermined by institutionalized segregation, voter suppression, and violent racism. Despite these barriers, the courage of individuals and communities laid the foundation for transformational change. The post-World War II era provided fertile ground for the civil rights movement. African American veterans, returning from fighting for freedom abroad, bristled at the hypocrisy of a nation that espoused liberty while denying it to its own citizens. This galvanized the black population and their allies, catalyzing grassroots activism and eventual legislative reform. Key milestones included the desegregation of public schools following Brown v. Board of Education, 1954, the Montgomery bus boycott, 1955-1956, and the landmark Civil Rights Act of 1964. Leaders like Martin Luther King Jr., Rosa Parks, and Malcolm X emerged as icons, whose strategies ranged from nonviolent protest to vehement demands for justice. These efforts forced America to reckon with its systemic inequality, bringing issues of freedom and justice to the forefront. However, opposition to the movement was fierce and often violent, as captured by the brutality against marchers in Selma, Alabama, during the 1965 Bloody Sunday demonstrations. Such acts of resistance highlighted the lengths to which institutional power sought to maintain the status quo. While reforms were achieved, the movement also underscored a deeper truth. Civil rights were not granted freely, but seized through forceful struggle. The chapter examines not only the achievements, but also the limitations of the civil rights movement. Inequality in economic opportunities, housing, and education persisted long after key victories were won, demonstrating that formal legal changes could not erase centuries of entrenched prejudice overnight. The ongoing social revolution, even in the 21st century, owes its momentum to the tireless efforts of those who sought justice during that pivotal era. Chapter 8: Beyond the Millennium, America in the 21st Century. The turn of the 21st century marked a transitional period where the United States found itself at the forefront of new challenges and opportunities in a rapidly globalizing world. This chapter outlines America's evolution as it adapted to transformative technologies, international conflicts, and shifting domestic priorities. The September 11, 2001 attacks became a defining moment for America's global posture, ushering in an era of heightened security consciousness and military intervention. The subsequent wars in Afghanistan and Iraq raised questions about America's role as a global power broker and whether its interventions aligned with its democratic ideals. Simultaneously, the Great Recession of 2008 tested America's economic resilience and exposed vulnerabilities in the fabric of its capitalist systems. Domestically, the United States experienced shifting demographics, with growing racial and cultural diversity challenging long-held notions of what it meant to be American. Despite the election of Barack Obama, the first African-American president, the country simultaneously experienced a rise in political polarization and societal divisions. Issues such as income inequality, healthcare reform, and climate change became flashpoints in national debates, reflecting a populace deeply divided on the path forward. Technological advancements, meanwhile, revolutionized every aspect of daily life, from communication to work. Yet technologies like social media also contributed to misinformation and political fragmentation. The promise of connectivity was juxtaposed with the reality of deepening divides, often amplified in the digital domain. The chapter closes by examining America's evolving identity in a globalized world. The 21st century paints a picture of a nation grappling with the consequences of its choices, yet remaining a sphere of innovation and cultural influence. Whether the United States can navigate these complexities while upholding its foundational ideals remains the critical question for its future. Conclusion. The story of the United States is not merely a chronicle of dates and deeds. It is a living, breathing epic of dreams, confrontations, courage, and, at times, deep contradiction. As we close the final chapter of Land of the Brave, a bold history of the United States, we are left with a nation ever unfinished, its tapestry woven from countless threads of aspiration, strife, heartbreak, and hope. This bold history began long before the echoes of colonists' boots touched American shores. It began with the heartbeat of ancient civilizations that cultivated the land, created art, and built complex societies. Their wisdom, endurance, and suffering still call out from the soil, a reminder of all that was gained and lost when new tides swept across the continent. The seeds of change arrived on foreign ships, bearing with them dreams of liberty that would ignite revolutions, birth new governments, and echo across generations. The cries for freedom, sometimes triumphant, sometimes anguished, sent shockwaves through the halls of power, demanding that the nation live up to its restless ideals. Yet, with every leap toward progress, came the somber realization of liberty's price. The Constitution, both beacon and battleground, enshrined rights while wrestling with the shadows of inequality and division. From the rugged Rockies to the Rio Grande, the American dream swelled with every new horizon. Expansion was both a promise and a peril, a search for opportunity that often collided tragically with the rights and lives of those already dwelling upon the land. The Civil War tested the nation's sinews, as brothers fought brothers, and the soul of a country strained under the weight of its own contradictions. When the cannons finally fell silent, the struggle for unity and equality was just beginning, echoing through marches, courtrooms, and the quiet resolve of everyday citizens. Industrialization transformed not just skylines, but identities, forging a restless spirit of innovation and progress. Yet within the hum of factories and the glare of city lights, questions about the very meaning of being American grew louder, richer, more complex. The 20th and 21st centuries saw the United States emerge as a beacon and sometimes a paradox of power and promise in a turbulent world. Waves of global conflict, technological marvels, and changing social tides have tested its fabric time and time again. Through civil rights movements, economic upheaval, triumphs in science, and painful reckonings with injustice, America's journey has been one of continual renewal. As we stand at today's threshold, the future is neither certain nor static. The United States is an experiment ongoing, a nation ever striving, ever stumbling, ever rising. It is in the courage to face uncomfortable truths, the boldness to dream bigger dreams, and the enduring hope that liberty and justice can, after all, be made real for every voice within its borders. This is the land of the brave, not solely for its past glories, but for the unyielding spirit that refuses to let the dream die. Its story belongs to all who dare imagine it anew. If you found this video helpful, inspiring, or entertaining, don't forget to hit that like button. And if you're new here, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss out on future content. Your support means the world. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.